Welcome back to the Nora Show. I could not be more excited. Let's do some updates. It's starting to get colder out, so it's sweater weather. I'm very excited about that. I realized that my sloper needed some help. It was the first one I drew. I really didn't know what I was doing. This was prior to most of my pattern drafting experiences in general. The sloper wasn't very good. It was very much a first try, and now that I've done as much as I have done, I wanted to go back and actually redo it and do a little bit better. And I did. I have taken my measurements that I am capable of taking without help. I'm going to have to wait until the kids come home from school for me to finish the skirt length part. But that's the part that I'm not nearly as worried about in general. That's something that I can fill in later. This is the part that we're going to mess with first. This is my calculation worksheet, and this is a worksheet for a modern drafting that has standard industries of depth for low hip, high hip, empire height, and we're going to go ahead and go with that. Because if I do this and I sew the muslin and I put it on and it completely fits me like a glove, at that point in time I can take something like this, mess with these measurements down here, and I can end up with this skirt, and it's going to fit me exactly the way I want it to. Because if I take a simple measurement of 1/2 inch plus 1/2 and then do a 1/4 of a hip minus 1 for my waist, this isn't going to fit. I am not that simple of a human. So let's do this. At this point, we're going to add darts and shaping. I've highlighted the front and back measurements so that I don't get confused. 20 inches down is an industry standard for a skirt sloper. Because of the difference between my low hip with ease and my waist with ease, I would look best with a 1-inch dart. It is time for waist shaping. I'm going to square down 1/2 inch from my center front waist, move over 3/4 of an inch, and use my French curve up to my 7 1/4 point. Time to extend the waist dart. I've now been dealing with the Haslam system long enough to know that the length of the dart, regardless of what it says in the pattern, I really do need to custom that to my personal fit. I am going to be using a 1-inch dart that comes down 4 inches. Your dart length needs to match your dart width. Otherwise, it's not going to fall flat. The point of a dart is not to match the pattern. The point of a dart is to make something fit you. Let's put in the waist to high hip and high hip to low hip. 3/8 in, 1/2 inch down. Seven inches down, make a mark from here to here. A nice straight line. So this is on the back. This is on your center back, so that you don't end up with that weird thing where all of the material comes out from your back of your waist and does weird stuff and looks bad. Come in 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 inch down, ignore the 1 inch. That was just me being silly. 1/2 inch down, 7 inches down to here, straight line. I've already taken out 3/8 right there. So my 1 inch dart needs to subtract 3/8, which is 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to finish off my waistline now. As a reminder, 3 3/8 plus 3 3/8 equals 6 3/4. The 5/8 plus the 3/8 is 1. So the darts match the front, match the back, and the waist is correct. Time to create a curve for the back waist. Come down 1/2 inch and curve up. This and this are perpendicular. Remember, you want to be able to fit the other material right here and be able to have something that matches. You want to have this a perpendicular corner so that this side of the material and this side of the material match. Time to put in the back waist dart. 1/2 of 5/8 is 5/16. We are going to do a 3.5 inch dart because of the size of the dart here. Remember, the point of this is not to match the Haslam pattern. The point is to match my body right now. And with that size of a dart, I cannot handle a 4 inch dart anymore, but I can handle a 3.5 inch dart. This is the high hip. We're going to move 9.5 inches out. Waist to high hip in a straight line. Mild curve from the high hip to the low hip. All right, this is the draft of my 1 dart skirt sloper. It's time to cut this out. I need to do a muslin. I need to put in some punches so that I can easily put in dots for the apex of my darts. I am going to ignore how wonky this looks, and I am going to trust my measurements before I start changing anything, and I'm going to cut out a muslin, put it on, and if there's an issue with this very interesting thing going on here, then I will change it. But until then, until I have proof that this is wrong, I'm not going to mess with it. Put both the front and the back together at the side seam. Let's get super detailed about one industry standard measurement and how it seems to have changed over the decades. Let's first look at today's industry standard of a waist to a low hip. For the average height, you want 8.5 inches from here to here on both the front and on the back. I want you to think about this low hip point to be a fixed point on you. This is what contains your entire rear end. This isn't a movable spot because your butt doesn't actually move. Now the waist, you can either go up, you can go down, but you cannot actually move your low hip. This is not a movable point. This, as everyone who has ever worn clothing knows, can go up and it can go down. So when we're talking about the 8.5 inches, what we're talking about is an actual concept of your actual waist where you bend back and forth to your low hip, and that being this. Now, if you are a tall human, much taller than me, funny enough, it's actually not that big of a change. 9 inches, standard industry measurement. If you are a short human, reduce that down to 8 inches. Now, these are averages, and we all know that an average does not necessarily match what is actually going on. If you are a human that walks into a store and puts on clothing and nothing ever fits from here to here, it means that you do not fit within industry standards. It means you're outside of them, and that's why you feel bad. It's not because you're broken, it's because you're just simply not the average. As a reminder, this sloper is not an era-specific concept, actually. This genuinely fits me as a second skin. Therefore, I can mess with this and create era-specific clothing that actually fits me simply because I don't care where a style wants my low hip to be, that is where my low hip is, and the clothing must go around me. I do not change to fit the clothing needs to change to fit me. Okay, let's talk 1920s Haslam Designs. The one number I want you to look at right now is a 14 inches from your under armpit to your low hip. This is long, especially for, think about it this way, this is the 1920s. How tall were your ancestors? How tall was your great-grandmother, who was born in 1900 something and is now 20 years old in the 1920s? That 14 inches, that is a serious dropped hip, even for a low hip. So what they're trying to do here is really extend and elongate the body. So keep that in mind. This skirt does not have a waistband. The reason that it doesn't have a waistband is because from here to here is 14 inches and it is trying to ride as low as it can as a simple tube around. Take a look at this. There's not a whole lot of shaping here. This is a tube from your low hip down. You can do a tube from your low hip. You don't have to do any shaping from your waist to your high hip to your low hip. All of that is eliminated and you're simply going from the armpit to the low hip. So that is the 1920s. Now let's say it does have a waistband. This is your low hip. Your low hip measurement is likely your largest measurement. So that specific measurement can be shifted up or down depending on era fashion standards. But the low hip itself has to maintain its actual size or be bigger. On this 1920 skirt with a waistband, the low hip is likely 1 inch lower than the actual low hip, and 7 inches up from that new point would result in an inch down from my waist, indicating an 8-inch drop for a 5'4" me. Remember how I was talking about the modern measurement from your natural waist to here being 8.5 inches, unless you're super short, in which case you need to reduce it down to 8? Let's say 8 was the original industry standard for the average height of a woman in 1920. That's still 7. this is at least 1 inch below your natural waistline. So let's say you personally today, with the height and body that you have, is 8.5 inches from your waist to your low hip, and you are trying to make this skirt, you need to add 1/2 inch. This needs to be 7.5 inches because you're taking an inch off. Let's now look at the 1930s Haslam design foundation. This is the number that we are now looking at. It's now 13 inches from your armpit to your low hip. Your low hip is now brought back up. They are trying to shorten and not elongate. When I say shorten, what I mean is they are going back to the natural waistline and not trying to drop the hip down. Now let's take a look at the skirt. From the waist to the low hip is now 8 inches. We have increased back up to a natural waistline because I bet this is not a 1/2 inch drop off of your waist. I believe that this is the industry standard for average height at the time, which means that if you were drafting something from the 1930s and you are of average height, add 1/2 inch. If you are a tall human, add an inch. If you are a short human, don't change a thing. Let's take a look at the 1940s. This is where you're going to start seeing more variation from this point in time and on. You have 8 inches down here. This is where they want the flare to start coming out. This low hip area is a fantastic place to place where the skirt starts flaring out. It's quite classic for 1940, actually. However, this is also from the 1940s, and you can take a look and see that it is 7 inches. My best guess is that there are certain times that you want that waistline to be a little bit lower to allow for the type of waistband that you want, or that your coat is going to be coming in and you want to make sure that you can have as small a waistline as you can have. Now let's take a look at the 1950s. The 1930s, 40s, and 50s have all determined the armpit to the hip is 13 inches. How much it comes in right here has changed. It is now 1 inch. Let's take a look at the skirt. 6 inches. I don't think that they're lowering the hip line. What I think they're actually doing is placing the low hip measurement higher up based upon the waistline. So from waist down, raise the largest section of the skirt up and then flare out from there. The 1950s loved flaring, so they moved the flare line up to 6 inches below your waistline. However, I'm going to note one more time that they are aiming for 7 inches from your waist to your low hip. I think this is the same thing that I was saying for the 1940s, that if you wanted a super snatched waist, your waistline probably came down about an inch so that there was less material there. Nevertheless, this is probably still too short for a pencil skirt for most women of average height today. Therefore, my recommendation is, if you are sewing vintage patterns, unless you are short by today's average measurements, all of these patterns will have the wrong low hip to waist measurement. If you're sewing it, if you're short, keep it the same. If you're average, add 1/2 inch. If you're tall, add an inch. For everyone that made it to the end of this crazy technical video, thank you. I bet you are already a subscriber, but if not, you know how to do that. Please do look at the description for links to the products that I use, as well as my Patreon account, because I absolutely want a better camera for what I am doing.